radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Thank you for joining us today on the 4th of July. As a nation, I think hopefully we're celebrating our unity as one nation and making an effort to get ourselves back together instead of agreeing to stay broken apart. So I wanted to thank you for joining us today. On Mondays, as you know, we interview activists and people from St. Louis to really expose the catastrophe that's going on there. So today it is really my great honor to ask back Kay Drey from Beyond Nuclear, who is very well known in St. Louis and dear to everyone in St. Louis and actually in the anti-nuclear movement. So Kay, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for your program.
Well, thank you. So, look, this morning, one of the things that we mentioned very quickly before we got on the air was this new proposed regulation that is open for comment it's called the www.regulations.gov. And it is document number, oh my gosh, big long EPA. I think what I'll do is try to keep this link and see if I can get the producer to put it in. It's EPA HQ OAR 202-0021-0051. It's essentially the EPA is going to raise the standards for radiation limits in the population. If there's any type of emergency, a nuclear explosion or some kind of a catastrophe at a nuclear power plant, until the catastrophe is over with, the EPA will raise the allowable radiation limits. And that reminded me of St. Louis, because if they pass this, are they now going to tell us that the people living near Westlake Landfill and Coldwater Creek are living within acceptable limits?
Apparently that's what they will do, or have been doing, actually.
Exactly. They have been doing that. Okay, let me ask you this. Do you know if there's any movement going on in St. Louis about getting the EPA out of the process of remediation and getting the Army Corps of Engineers? Is there any movement? Is there any word on what's happened with that legislation to get that fully remediated, all the sites in St. Louis?
Well, we are still working on it. Actually, the Army Corps of Engineers has been cleaning up all our historic sites except for Westlake. So we've been trying for a long time now to get the Westlake landfill that's in the Missouri River floodplain, to get that turned over to the Army Corps of Engineers. So we haven't given up on that. We're still trying to have that happen. They're the ones who have the technical people who know what the data should how they should read and so forth. So we need the Corps of Engineers to add this site, Westlake Landfill, to the ones they've been working on. In fact, they're still working to clean up Coldwater Creek, which is where a bunch of the wastes have ended up.
So this is what I don't understand about that resistance there. Why is it, what is the resistance at like a governmental level? I mean, why was there any resistance at all to just go, okay, this agency should just handle it instead of this agency? I mean, what's the resistance of getting, you say you've been trying for a long time. What's the issues in keeping it from getting it done?
I think the reason that Westlake landfill hasn't been turned over to the Army Corps of Engineers is just that the EPA would be embarrassed. I don't know if a whole government agency can be embarrassed, but I think that's the problem. They don't want to admit that they're not qualified to do what they're doing, which is to look at Westlake landfill. We know Westlake landfill is contaminated. All the other sites in St. Louis they've been cleaned up by the Army Corps of Engineers, and this one should be too. This is the one final major site that we need cleaned up. But Westlake landfill is currently under the control of the EPA because it was decreed to be a Superfund site, which is an EPA project. And so it's just sort of, I don't understand why they just can't say the Corps should take this over, because the Corps of Engineers has been cleaning up our other radioactive waste sites in St. Louis and should be cleaning up this one.
This is like the interesting little part of the onion. I guess you have to be deep in government to figure out, because from the outside it looks like it's just one government agency to another. So the resistance to having the job done, I mean, that's the issue. Is this a matter of just, for me, as an American, I don't care who does it. I just don't want people in St. Louis having to live right next door to a nuclear dump site that's burning.
Right, that's right. And it also, the fact that it's in the Missouri River floodplain means that the contaminants in the water, the groundwater, they go into the Missouri River and on downstream into the Mississippi River and so on. It's not just a St. Louis problem.
Right.
And the stuff, of course, goes into the air as well. So these are historic wastes, and I guess what's upsetting also to a lot of people and me is that we're wanting to make more nuclear weapons, and that when we haven't even finished cleaning up the waste created by the nuclear weapons from World War II.
And nuclear power plants. Bill Gates is pushing those little tiny mini nuclear power plants all over the place. That's what he wants.
Yeah, well, there's no safe place for any of the waste, and somebody should just say, we've got to quit generating more.
Uh-huh.
It's just an absolutely immoral technology, nuclear weapons and nuclear power and radioactive waste processing. I mean, certainly there are good uses for things radioactive for people using, medical purposes, but we should not be messing with nuclear power and nuclear weapons.
Well, I think one of the things that, I'm a relatively new anti-nuke activist, to be honest. It's 2016. I didn't really actively get engaged until 2013. One of the things that I am astounded at is the lack of science. They spend billions of dollars twisting like pretzels to lie to us about how great it is, like this new EPA. The EPA is being pushed by the licensees, by the industry, that if there's a nuclear emergency, just raise the limits because there's nothing we can do about it anyways. So you just let people live there and get polluted. And this is the scariest part. This is, in my view, it's almost demonic, because they're just going to disregard all life, human life, animal life, plant life. And it's like an experiment. Say, okay, well, we'll raise the limits, and we're going to be the country that says we can raise the limits by 3,000% on strontium-90, and we're going to insist that the emperor has no clothes. And we're going to just wait for people to drop off like flies. And when that happens, we're going to deny that it was caused by radiation. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
incomprehensible.
Well, it's an immoral technology and it has immoral proponents, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't understand where these people are coming from. I mean, they know how dangerous radiation is, and I just don't understand how they can be comfortable with themselves when they're promoting the generation of more. I mean, I know we have a whole bunch, and that's part of our problem here in St. Louis. Is we have the oldest radioactive waste of the atomic age. Mallinckrodt Chemical Works downtown on the Mississippi River, next to the Mississippi River, processed all the uranium that went into the world's first self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. That was on December 2nd, 1942. And, it was a great experiment. Everyone felt very successful and exciting and so forth. 3 huge chemical companies in the United States had refused to even try to figure out how to purify uranium so that it could be used to make nuclear weapons. But Mallinckrodt Chemical Works agreed to do it, and they purified all the uranium that went into the first nuclear chain reaction, self-sustaining chain reaction in 1942, and began generating radioactive waste and processed uranium downtown next to downtown for 15 years, and then they moved over to St. Charles County next to St. Louis County and processed uranium for another 10 years. So they generated radioactive waste for 25 years here in St. Louis. Most of us didn't know anything about that until, relatively recently. And so we have mess all over, and a lot of the materials have been dug up and sent off, and I hate to mention to which states, because the stuff isn't safe anywhere. But it certainly shouldn't be where it is right now. Our one main remaining site that must be cleaned up is radioactive waste that was illegally dumped in the floodplain of the Missouri River, which then the Missouri River gets contaminated, and then there's a confluence just downstream and with the Mississippi River, so that also gets contaminated. It's just, this stuff is, and it's radioactive virtually forever, like 4.5 billion years, and you have to multiply the half-life of uranium by 10, or any half-life. So it's forever. These materials will be giving off radioactive particles and rays, and they should not be left in the Missouri River floodplain. Or we should, and I guess what's also, of course, very disturbing to me, and is that we are generating more waste when we don't know what to do with what we've already generated. And we have a pamphlet here in St. Louis that says our federal government creates nuclear weapons. As with other nuclear weapons waste sites, our federal government has the moral and fiscal responsibility to clean up the nuclear weapons waste at Westlake landfill. And our federal government has the moral and fiscal money responsibility to clean up nuclear weapons waste all over the United States. And it's just they have to be cleaned up. It's not easy. I don't like that human beings have to be exposed to the cleanup programs. But they should not, waste like these should not be left in the floodplain of the Missouri River that goes into the Mississippi River and on beyond.
Well, this is why it ought to just be ceased. The whole entire industry, they ought to just shut down the new production and put these nuclear brains into let's figure out how to reverse this nuclear chain reaction, or how to resolve this with the uranium. I mean, they have created these man-made elements, and they have no idea how to. They really haven't figured out how to remediate it. Really, their idea is like a little kid, let's just sweep it under the carpet and maybe nobody will notice. You know what I mean? It's incomprehensible, the lack of responsibility by the people in that industry.
Well, I really like your sentence that we should put these minds to work, or however you said it,
Yeah.
to figure out how to isolate these materials that they have already dumped all over so many different communities in the United States and worldwide, unfortunately. So, it's not going to be easy. It may not even be possible, but we should not leave these radioactive wastes from the production of nuclear weapons and nuclear power. We don't have a good solution. Uranium-238, which we have probably more of here or have had than sort of at least any metropolitan area. Uranium-238 has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. That's with a B. And you have to multiply the half-life by at least 10 to figure out how long that material will continue giving off radioactive particles and radioactive rays. And, here they are bringing that into communities, and then they make nuclear power plant fuel, and then at each of the nuclear power plants, they're generating messes that they don't know what to do with. I mean, it's just plain an immoral technology.
Well, not only that, this is my other objection, and I really believe that our physicians have dropped the ball because like we had mentioned a minute ago before we got on the air, the citizens have to do the studies. Like in St. Louis, they collected teeth to find that they're in baby teeth, right? But it was the citizens doing these actions. This is the thing that I find the most egregious. There's no regard for human health in the nuclear industry.
I'm glad you mentioned the baby tooth survey because that really was a remarkably successful
Why don't
project.
You tell our listeners what happened with that?
Well, there was a man named Barry Commoner who died a few years ago, and citizens from all over. One of my best friends, Yvonne Logan, helped run the project. And they collected, as little children would lose their teeth, and put the teeth under the pillow so the baby tooth fairy could come and give them a dime or whatever. So they collected. They had parents send in baby teeth, and they looked at the baby teeth, and they had been experimenting or testing atom bombs and exploding them various places. And then one of the products that would be released when they would test atom bombs was strontium-90, strontium, strontium-90. And it turns out that strontium in the human body goes where bones are and so forth. And they found that they were able to test baby teeth, the teeth that children would lose because they were getting older. And they would test the baby teeth and could prove that strontium-90 was in those baby teeth. And it's really a sort of a man-made radioisotope. It's not found a lot, normally in the world. And so this was an extremely successful way of saying that if they're doing these atom bomb tests, they should realize that the radioactivity that they're releasing into the environment doesn't just, dissipate and it's gone. It drops down onto the earth and it's taken up by cows and the kids drink milk and it ends up in the baby teeth, and they were able to test it. And so it really was effective. And this happened then all over the country. They would collect baby teeth, and it was very effective way of showing how these horrible radioactive isotopes can disperse just so far, and so that it helped stop atmospheric bomb testing, which was great. But we have, I guess, one of my favorite reasons for disliking nuclear power plants is that every nuclear power reactor releases my favorite isotope, which is tritium, which is radioactive hydrogen, and which the tritium remains it gives off radioactive beta particles for 10 times its half-life, which is 12 years. So it's the stuff, the tritium that they are releasing from nuclear power plants into whatever body of water the power plant uses for cooling. That tritium is around for more than 100 years, and people have to drink that water, and that's tritium is radioactive hydrogen. It would take all the energy that the nuclear power plant is generating to remove radioactive hydrogen from H2O, from water, hydrogen, and oxygen. So since it would be so expensive to remove the tritium, and they really don't have a technology to do it when you're talking about gazillions of gallons of water. So since they cannot technologically remove tritium, radioactive hydrogen, they're not required to remove it. So we're drinking it if we're downstream from a nuclear power reactor or a nuclear weapons, production or testing facility. So this, we should stop messing around with nuclear power and nuclear weapons. It's just not acceptable for humanity or for any living creatures.
So, Kay, let me ask you some questions about what you just said. So, you're telling me, because I have read, the first week I did this radio show, there was an article in Business Week that said, State of Illinois, the University of Illinois confirmed that over 6 million Americans are drinking tritium-tainted water. And I was astounded by that. But what you're saying is that near every nuclear power plant, tritium regularly gets released into the water supply, and it lasts
around the clock.
Around the clock, and then so it is in every water supply near a nuclear power plant, and
right.
It stays in the water. Its contaminant stays active for 24, 25 years.
Well, it's 12.3-year half-life, and you have to multiply that by 10. It's around as long as we need to think about. So it's for, it stays around a whole long time.
So then,
and I remember, I guess I called a health physicist at Oak Ridge National Laboratory many years ago when I first began reading about tritium. It's my favorite isotope. It's on my license plate, but I asked, could you please tell me about tritium? And he said, tritium is no big deal. All it can do is destroy a DNA molecule. And I said, well, I don't really want my DNA molecules destroyed or my children's DNA molecules or anybody's DNA. All it can do is destroy a DNA molecule.
That's not so bad. Like, when we don't know what that's going to, that's the weird thing. Like, that's why we have peculiar genetic diseases from this, right? Because it's that one break in the strand that causes the weird thing that happens.
Well, it's increasing our risk, and it's not necessary, and it's not acceptable, and we need to have. Unfortunately, they're building nuclear power plants still, and in other countries, and there's no place for even the first cup of radioactive waste that we generated here in St. Louis in, I guess it would have been 1942. And we have how can you promise? Uranium-238 has a half-life of 4.5 billion years, which you have to multiply that by 10. I think I'm saying that right. I'd have to check real quickly, which I can do within. I think it's 4.5 billion year half-life, and you have to multiply the half-life by at least 10 to know how long a particular radioactive material is giving off radioactive particles and rays.
Let's see,
U-238 is 4.5 billion years. That's right. And tritium, my favorite isotope, radioactive hydrogen, which is, being released into the Missouri River from the waste that we have at Westlake Landfill. It has a half-life of 12 years, and so you have to multiply that by at least 10. This stuff is around forever. Human beings should not be creating this stuff and bringing it into the biosphere. It's immoral.
Well, the Wikipedia, when I just put it in, it says it's the most common isotope in uranium found in nature. Is that not a true statement that it's a natural uranium?
It is natural. There is radioactive tritium.
Okay.
Yeah, there is tritium in nature, but we're generating a bunch that would not exist.
Right.
It would not exist. And not only are we generating it, but at every nuclear power plant, we're releasing it into the air. There's steam that comes out of the cooling tower and stuff, and into the water, into whatever river, lake, or ocean is being used for cooling water to run the nuclear power plant. So, tritium is released everywhere, and there is no economically feasible way to remove the tritium from the water that is being released into the river, lake, or ocean that's needed for cooling, or as steam and so forth into the atmosphere. and it has, again, a half-life of 12.3 years, and you have to multiply the half-life by at least 10. And so, it's 120 years, whatever they're generating today at my nuclear power plant, Callaway, in the middle of Missouri. Whatever is being generated today will be around for at least 120 years, giving off beta particles. And maybe I said this already. It's, that how a physicist said, did I say that that tritium is no big deal? All it can do is destroy a DNA molecule.
Yeah.
And this is, so that's the kind of mess we have. But
they say that it's expensive, that we can't do it. This is my argument. They haven't really looked. They don't want to spend the money looking on how this is. I mean, I strongly believe that the nuclear industry needs to, the way it's going to move forward in the future is to figure, all of the science ought to be on how to remediate the harm they've caused in the last 100 years. I mean, since they've been working on it, since Madame Curie started, experimenting and figuring it out, it's been nothing but death and destruction. And they've really never put money into figuring out how to, and yes, it is an expensive part of the process. I mean, but our government has, how much money are we pouring into the war machine on a daily basis? I mean, it's...
Yeah, but I'm not sure they can remove radioactive hydrogen. Water is hydrogen and oxygen, and it's also radioactive oxygen. But, I'm not sure they could spend all the money in the world and figure out how they could remove tritium that they're creating when they're making nuclear power and nuclear weapons. I'm not sure they could ever figure out how to remove hydrogen, radioactive hydrogen, from hydrogen and oxygen water. I'm not sure they could do it for all the money on the planet Earth.
Really, you don't think scientifically that's an impossibility?
I think it's an impossibility. Or at least I think we should accept the fact that it may be an impossibility. Until we figure out if it's even possible to remove it, we should stop generating more.
Yes. Well, I mean, what's happening in St. Louis, I mean, as you have all these sites, and one of the things, you probably know about all these sites, this has kind of surprised me in covering the story in St. Louis. It's not just Coldwater Creek and Westlake landfill. There's Weldon Spring. There's the little town across the river in, I think it's called Apollo, Illinois. These little towns, there's sites, and someone mentioned that they are finding other sites, other areas where Mallinckrodt just sold and dumped, and basically, I mean, what's the egregious part of what's going on in St. Louis is they've just covered this up with dirt. Like they just covered it up and said, yeah, that's good enough.
Well, that's right. And you mentioned, Mallinckrodt Chemical Works processed uranium downtown, next to downtown on the Mississippi River for 15 years, and then they moved their plant over to Weldon Spring in St. Charles County for another, and they operated the uranium plant for 10 years over in St. Charles County on the Missouri River. And they then, quotes, cleaned up the Weldon Spring site. They're cleaning up the downtown Mallinckrodt site. They've been doing that for years, trying to remove the radioactive materials because it's on the Mississippi River. But over at Weldon Spring, where they processed uranium for 10 years, they have put all the radioactive waste in a big, huge, gigantic pile, and with some rocks on top. And they invite school children and others, the public, to come and walk on top of the pile, this huge pile. And at the bottom, at the base of the pile, after the children have run up to the top and looked at, I don't know what, there's nothing to look at, but after they've done that, then they can come down the back down to ground level, and there are picnic tables there, and they can have their lunches down below. I mean, it's just insanity.
They still do that today? They're doing that?
Yeah. Yes, I was just there within the last month just visiting, and I thought I could just go into their historic museum-ish kind of thing. And that I could just walk in there and no one would notice. And I don't know, immediately a woman said, "Well, hello, Kay," and then I was just I had to be out there in that area, and so I went with a friend. In fact, with a wonderful person, Carolyn Bauer, who she and two other reporters at the time at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch wrote a series of articles about our various radioactive waste sites all over St. Louis. They spent 2 years doing the research, talking to former workers at the Mallinckrodt plants downtown and at Weldon Spring, and it was simply wonderful. They were able to explain to the public how dangerous this stuff was because they had all this excellent research and brilliant writing. Well, I was over at this museum with Carolyn Bauer, one of the three reporters, and it was, I just was so embarrassed that they knew who I was. So
why were you embarrassed? You're funny.
I just was.
You didn't think you didn't think they'd recognize you?
No, I didn't think they would. But at any rate, I just wanted to peek and see. But looking at this, I guess the thing about the huge pile over at Weldon Spring in St. Charles County on the Missouri River, right near the Missouri River, is the fact that they have these picnic benches down below for kids to have their school lunches or whatever.
And in the face of what's gone on in Coldwater Creek and Westlake Landfill, they're still doing that. No one's changed anything.
No, and I guess EPA is responsible for Westlake Landfill because it is part of a landfill that is a Superfund site, and I think the Superfund Act is a very important act to try to clean up chemical waste. But really, we want the Army Corps of Engineers to take over the cleanup of our St. Louis waste because they are cleaning up nuclear weapons waste nationwide. And unfortunately, there's no good place to take these wastes, but they certainly should not be where they are now in the floodplain at Westlake Landfill is in the floodplain of the Missouri River, and the Missouri River floods all the time. And we have a levee there that was not built by the Corps of Engineers. It's just a privately built levee. And so the stuff goes from Westlake Landfill into the Missouri River and on into the Mississippi River and so forth. I mean, these nuclear power and nuclear weapons production should just be outlawed worldwide, and instead we're getting more nuclear power plants built in other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, people like ourselves are considered radicals. We're considered conspiracy theorists. We're considered, just over the top, freaked out over radiation for no reason. Because somebody actually said this. Why, when I talked to them about these changing regulations, they're like, well, there you go. Why would the EPA be approving it if it wasn't that bad, if it was okay? Why? I mean, the trust level with the EPA for many Americans is still very high. To be honest, my trust level with the EPA prior to this was pretty high. Like, I really am stunned that they're resisting transferring the authority to another agency who could actually handle it.
Well,
they ought to be
Army
cooperating with them.
Yeah, the Army, Corps is responsible nationwide for the cleanup of the nuclear weapons waste, which is why it should be cleaning up Westlake Landfill. These were waste generated, during the processing of uranium for nuclear weapons. So it's appropriate for them to do that. I guess the whole of nuclear power and nuclear weapons production is just not something mankind should be doing, and unfortunately they're building nuclear power plants in other countries all over the world, and we don't know where to put any of these wastes to keep them isolated from the air and water from rivers, lakes, oceans, and the air we breathe. It's an immoral technology. It may be brilliant. The people who created it, figured out how to split the atom and so forth. They were brilliant scientists, and some of it was done right here in St. Louis. But it's irresponsible because we have no place on the planet Earth to isolate these materials for the requisite number literally, in some cases, of billions of years, millions, hundreds of thousands of years.
Well, the scientists who discovered this, Dr. John Goffman, the men who really who discovered this technology, all of them believe that we ought not to implement using them. They all suggested that it's a great technology, but we're not even there at understanding how it's going to affect the environment. So we ought to go slow in terms of implementing its use for power, implementing its use for war. We need to really study this before we change any of that up. And all of them were ignored and demeaned. And I really believe, today's the 4th of July, where our country really broke free from England. That was the day when we made ourselves the United States, and we began this idea, frankly, of murder, death, kill across the whole entire continent. I mean, that's kind of what we've been at war ever since we signed the Declaration of Independence, except for 2 years. I mean, we've decimated, speaking of nuclear, the Native American nations. I mean, that's where we send all of our uranium tailings.
Well, that's where we mine uranium, is Native American lands. Too.
I mean, what did I read? Something like over 500 abandoned uranium mines around just the Navajo Nation. And the Native Americans are suffering greatly with birth defects, sterility, diabetes, all the diseases that you get from exposure to radiation. And yeah, it might look like the desert, this is the hard part about where do we send this stuff, Kay? So we send it out to the desert, but, the desert is the lifeblood of a lot of our ecology. It looks like nothing's out there, but we're killing the ability of our planet to live by creating more of this waste. And we have changed our planet in a way that we don't even understand.
Right, and we're continuing to do it, and that's what's so amazing.
I'll be honest, this is partly why I can't stand Hillary Clinton. I do not know how anybody could vote for a Republican or vote for Hillary Clinton, because she is very pro-nuclear. And, one of her last acts as Secretary of State is she went into a Ukrainian nation and insisted that they not buy a Russian reactor, that they buy a Westinghouse reactor. That's why I call her Monsanto Westinghouse Clinton, because she just is a mouth. They say that it brings money into our nation, but frankly, that's not the kind of money that you want to have. I mean, even if it does bring money in, we need to change how the industry works and make it scientific research. That's really what we need to pour our money. We need our students and our people to get educated, so we have a lot of nuclear brains figuring out what to do with all this waste. I personally believe that we can find the solution if we look for it. We haven't been looking.
Right. I'm afraid I'm 83 years old, and I guess I made my first public speech in 1942 against nuclear power, and I'm not a scientist. I have a degree in cultural anthropology because I started out because I love Native Americans, and I wanted one of my 3 kids to find a wonderful so-called American Indian to marry, but none of the 3 of them has.
You must not have given your first speech in 1942. You mean 72 or 82?
No, my first speech on nuclear power, I think.
1942.
No, I'm sorry. No, it would have been.
You'd have been 9 years old. I don't think so.
Oh, I was born in 33. Yeah, no, I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, I think it was like.
No, I think when I said 42, that was when the first self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction happened, December 2nd, 1942.
Wow.
And
really?
I don't know when I made my first speech. I think, I don't know.
Weren't you actively engaged when Helen Caldicott had like 1 million people in the streets in New York? I mean, we really did slow down the nuclear train in the 80s. We really did. I know here in Oregon, they were able to stop. Although Trojan in Oregon, they were going to build the Trojan nuclear power plant at the mouth of the Columbia River here in Oregon. And they got it shut down, but now it's a repository for nuclear waste.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Oh,
which is horrendous. I mean, the Northwest, frankly, they dug in deep. We can thank Patty Murray for that. Patty
Still,
Murray and her
still,
family, yes, Patty
yeah,
Murray and her family are very pro-nuclear. Like, she's the senior senator from Washington, and in Washington is where we house all of our nuclear submarines. We have Hanford, we have the Columbia Generating Station. There's a nave in right on the corner of Idaho and Oregon. There is a Navy nuclear facility. We have Trojan at the mouth of the Columbia River. I mean, the downside to what's happened in our neck of the woods is we're sitting on an active earthquake fault, and Columbia Generating Station is sitting on top of an active earthquake fault, which the licensee lied about to the government when they applied for it. They knew it was there, and they said that there was nothing there. And it's only 15, 20, less than 20 miles away from Hanford. So if we have an earthquake, no one could get into Hanford to maintain those waste sites, and we're going to have an explosion in bye-bye food supply in North America. Because that's,
yeah.
like, these are grave issues that, we keep pretending like aren't going to be that big of a deal.
Right. And yet, I guess the reason I call tritium my favorite isotope is because it is released whether or not there's an accident, and so are a lot of other wastes. Accidents are horrible, and I just figured out when I made my first speech against nuclear power was in 1974, when I was 41 years old, and I'm now 83.
Wow.
Is that math better?
Yeah. Wow. And so you have been talking about
The
this.
day I made my first speech was when Karen Silkwood was run off the road. That was November 13, 1974.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so that's how I can remember. But I really, math is not my favorite thing.
Me
So,
either. I'm with you on that. That's 40. So you've been fighting. So, okay, you
and
have.
before that, my real field is civil rights. But I decided it doesn't matter if people learn to get along together if we have no planet. So since 1974, I've been fighting nuclear power and radioactive waste issues.
This is the thing. Like, why do we have to fight it? This is my thing. Like, I kind of get into this a little bit with some of the what I call establishment anti-nukers, right? Because they're all like, well, we don't want to offend anybody. You have to be nice. I'm really sick of us having to look at our behavior and them not looking at their behavior. I am really tired of playing nicey-nicey and being politically correct with these government agencies, like with the EPA. What's the point of us having them if they're going to allow the levels of radiation to be 3,000 times over the current limit? We might as well just not even have them. What's the point?
Well, yeah, and I guess I tend to look to the Army Corps of Engineers, at least, for our historic radioactive waste sites. They do have the technology, they have the staff, to find where the radioactive materials are. And by gosh, the West is sure filled up with, Native American reservations. There's so much abandoned uranium waste. It is just not an acceptable technology. It's just immoral. Absolutely. I have a wonderful quote that I love of a man who was received the Nobel laureate in physics. He was a 1970 Nobel laureate in physics, Hannes Alfvén, and he said, "The fission reactor produces both energy and radioactive waste. We want to use the energy now and leave the radioactive waste for our children and grandchildren to take care of. This is against the ecological imperative, which is, thou shalt not leave a polluted and poisoned world to future generations." Isn't that a wonderful quote?
Wouldn't that be nice if they actually implemented that? I mean, this is and anyone who even thinks about nuclear, we understand that it's not just, this is where it's kind of like the double-edged sword, especially like what's gone on in St. Louis. The Westlake landfill, it's not just the nuclear, it's the mix of mess from the waste at that fuse wrap site, from Monsanto, from all the other chemicals that are involved in all of this, Bechtel, all these, they don't even practice their own best practices in managing the waste, which is what caused the fire, right? So it's not just negligence in the nuclear industry, it's across the board in a lot of these technological industries. Uh, I mean, you name it in our country. They've really gone crosswire. Like there's actually no regard for human health in American industry. It's as if we're an afterthought. Our environment is an afterthought, and our elected officials are pretty much completely inept and incapable of standing up. I mean, look what's happened in Flint, Michigan. Our congressman
Right.
brought a bottle of water that looked like dirt water. And the president, a week and a half later, gets a bottle of water and says, see, we can drink bottled water. It's perfectly fine. And nobody at the EPA got fired. Still to this day. I mean, I mean, we have the Price-Anderson Act clearly indemnifying anyone in the nuclear industry, any corporation. That's why nobody can go to jail. So we have that act on the books, but you would think basic exposure to lead at the EPA level in Flint, Michigan was so egregious that somebody would get indicted, somebody would go to jail, somebody would lose their job, and yet here you and I are at 8 o'clock in the morning on the 4th of July. You know, we want to celebrate our country. We want to celebrate what we've created. But it feels like after World War II, we got taken over by the corporations and Mussolini moved into the United States. That's how I feel. Because we are completely incapable of demanding our government protect its citizens.
Well, in order, the field I work on primarily is nuclear power, nuclear weapons, nuclear waste, and there are no solutions, and I don't think there ever will be. How can mankind ever say they can get rid of something that has a half-life of 4.5 billion years? I mean, if we're going to bring these materials into contact with human beings, we just shouldn't do that. We shouldn't. I mean, we're generating some radioisotopes that wouldn't exist in nature, and then we're using naturally radioactive materials to generate them, like uranium that exists on the planet Earth. But we have an obligation, to try not to leave a dangerous environment for the people who follow us,
Mm-hmm.
and for the creatures and so forth. And it is an immoral technology, and yet unfortunately, people are, saying how wonderful it is that other nations are now building nuclear power plants when there's no place for even the first cupful of waste to be put that will keep it out of the contact with living creatures. It's just an immoral technology.
Well,
it's also expensive.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. Like, part of what happens here is they're looking at the bottom dollar. Like, right now they're building these nuclear power plants around the world. They're building them in China and India, in places where the population, in South America, they're starting uranium mining. That's why we're seeing microencephaly in South America. I don't believe for a second it's caused by the Zika virus. I don't believe it at all. And, the denial of the harm that nuclear causes, we're seeing it across the board. I mean, John Goffman said that when he studied the Japanese victims in Hiroshima, that the government denies radiation causes harm, which is what they want to do. They want to formalize it. So, I really encourage everyone to go to the EPA, go to the docket, look at the dockets for comments. It's a little bit buried. It's called the National Emission Standards for Hazardous Pollution, Air Pollutions, Site Remediation, Notice of Reconsideration, and Final Rule. So essentially what they're going to be doing is raising the standards of limits against us and just allowing us to get poisoned. That's not an
Why don't
answer.
you say the title, just abbreviate it, National Emission Standards, and just give a couple more words?
For hazardous air pollutants.
That's just fine. The National Emission Standards, and they're increasing those permissible levels.
That's right. And by different isotopes, but I mean, I think it was the strontium-90 that stuck out the most. It was like 3,300%. They're going to increase the allowable limits. Like what? Say what? Like you're going to do what? I was dumbfounded. And that's basically, and it's only, this is, when I was reading the story, it was like, well, don't worry, it's only going to happen if we have an emergency, a nuclear. So if there's a nuclear meltdown, they're going to change the standards now to say that if there's a nuclear meltdown, unless it gets over 3,000, the current limit right now, they're not going to have to warn us. They're going to say it's all acceptable levels. Keep your doors and windows closed. You'll be fine.
Now, are these emission standards for just in the event of an accident?
Uh-huh. This is how they're doing it. They're doing it just in the event of an accident, and they're saying it'll save thousands of lives. That's what they're trying to do. Is that they say it's going to raise.
It'll be permissible.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well, and I guess with nuclear power, they cannot operate a nuclear power plant without releasing radioactive materials into the air and water and onto the land. It's not possible to perform to have nuclear power, and here we are, still having nuclear reactors in our country and encouraging the construction elsewhere, and not leveling with the public about what they're doing, that already. So they should all be shut down immediately, so that we can continue having water. I mean, we shouldn't have the tragedy of Flint, Michigan should teach us something.
You'd think, but I really believe, and I don't know if you share this view, but I really believe like the people that are esteemed in our society, our senators, our congressmen, our doctors, these are the people, the professionals who are on the inside, have got to find what I call find their courage feet, man. They have got to be willing to stand up and what I consider to be American. Stand up and say things that you believe to be right to the face of big power and big money. We have got to, and because my complaint with the doctors is they have all the medical statistical facts. The reason that Flint, Michigan was outed, that we found out about it, is there was a brave doctor there who kept track of her own little patients who were getting sick from lead poisoning. She brought her own statistical facts to the EPA and forced them to look at it. Now, the guy she went to ended up getting fired by the EPA. He was the only person who got fired, was the one who was attempting to, find a solution. That should tell us something. But we have doctors who could put pressure on our government by collecting their own data. They're not doing it. We have elected officials who are playing the game, well, we're going to look at money here and money there while we're allowing the big military, God forbid we tell the military you can't increase your spending. I mean, something is wrong in our country when more than half of our budget goes to the military. That is not a correct position in my view. So,
well, and we should not be creating these horrible nuclear weapons.
No.
And continuing to generate nuclear waste from nuclear power plants when we know that radiation is harmful. I attended a conference of the Physicians for Social Responsibility, and I have a great deal of respect for that organization. But I stood up and I said, I have some workers who are working in a nuclear power plant who have a lot of bad health effects, and could somebody please come up to me, at the break and offer to do some help to look at some of the data that I had been collecting from about these workers. And one person came up to me, and it was a national conference, but it was a St. Louis doctor, and he said he would help me, and I sent him some information, and I never heard back, and I called back, and I said, are you going to be able to help me? And he said, well, he really didn't think he could. But, physicians know that radiation is harmful, that radioactive materials are harmful, and I wish they would really say, let's not have nuclear power, let's not generate,
Yes.
nuclear weapons. And we don't hear it from the physicians. And they know this stuff is going into the air and into the water and onto the land, long-lived material. So we need more brave people who are willing to do this. People like the late Dr. John Goffman.
That's right. That's right. We do need that desperately. We're crying for it right now. I found this on the internet just now. This is from the naturalnews.com. He's giving some comparisons to this change. even more astonishing and surprising to those who think Obama is good but Bush was bad is the fact that Obama's new EPA levels are vastly higher than the limits established under President Bush. The Bush administration proposal for strontium was 6,650 picocuries per liter. The new proposal is 7,400 picocuries per liter. For iodine 131, the Bush proposal was 8,490 picocuries per liter. The new proposal is 10,350 picocuries per liter. For cesium 137, the new proposal is for 13,600 picocuries per liter. It is just astounding that our government is even saying, this is a reasonable, it's a 925 increase of iodine 131, 195-fold increase in iodine 131 from 3 picocuries per liter to 10,350 picocuries per liter. It is, and strontium 90, which does cause leukemia, it's currently 8 picocuries per liter, and they want to increase it to 7,400 picocuries per liter. So what they're doing is endorsing the fact that we're all just going to get sick.
Well, it's pretty amazing. And when you mention strontium 90, it reminds me of the fact that St. Louis started way back when an effort to collect baby teeth, because strontium 90 does go into the baby teeth, and so when the children would lose a baby tooth, they'd send it in, it would be tested. And we were able to show in St. Louis and other places in the country that atom bomb testing was affecting the children's teeth, because strontium 90, a radioactive isotope, was in the teeth. It went where ivory would go, I guess, or something, I'm not sure. But at any rate, we know that these materials get into the human body. We should stop generating them. I mean, it's just immoral, and America should lead the way. And I guess some of our plants are shutting down, which is wonderful, like when you have an Oregon shut down, Trojan. But we need to shut them all down, and we need to stop making nuclear weapons, because we just should not be making our living creatures have to be exposed to these radioactive materials. They're dangerous.
You know what really blows me away when we talk about closing them down? They always talk about the unemployment, but these places, they employ 1,500 people, maybe 2,000. So to destroy an entire region so that we can keep 1,500 people employed, we're willing to expose an entire region to high levels of contaminants. The thinking is so backwards in the nuclear industry. This is what I believe, that we have to address it first, and then we can change their minds, and we can develop a whole technology learning how to remediate it. I think that's going to be our future. That's the only way that we can move forward as a planet, is if we really face this. So look, Kay, we have about a minute left. I want to thank you for joining us. This has been completely delightful to have you join us this morning on the 4th of July. I really made 4th of July really special for me, because as you said, you've been working on this for over 40 years, and obviously you do it because you do love our planet and you love our country, and your work has not gone unrecognized. You have done tremendously important work stopping the nuclear industry for the last 40 years. So I want to thank you personally for the work that you've put through.
Well, thank you for your wonderful program. I think it's terrific that you're doing this, Lonnie.
Well, I hope that we can change the conversation. That's my thing, is we want to impact a positive change. It's enough complaining about what we have to stop doing, but we have to figure out where we have to go. And finding solutions is really the only answer. We need to do the impossible, and I think we can do that. We need to put our courage feet on and take action, and just decide that we're going to find a solution. So we've got about 10 seconds left. Thank you, Kay Drey, for joining us. Put your courage feet on, everyone listening to us. Take action.